if we don't look at it through the eyes of faith, maybe to us, we also see it as a static image, a static art, piece of art, right? But actually, it's alive, it's active. And hopefully when we listen to what Clare thinks about and contemplates about the cross, that can come alive for us as well. And Clare is also known as the mirror mystic because of her deep love for Christ and her desire to follow him. And to Clare, it is essential to the Christian identity to become a mirror image of Christ. But the mirror is not like, it's not something that just came out of nowhere. It does have some scriptural references. And we see in the letters of St. Paul to the Corinthians. So we read the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, where he says, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face." And in the second letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, he also writes, "And all of us with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of God, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another, for this comes from the Holy Spirit." And the picture you see here is a medieval mirror, so not really like the very nice shiny mirror that we have today. This is more likely what they would have had at the time, which was a kind of a shiny piece of metal. Yeah. And just as a mirror that's actually empty in itself, reflects back what is given to it, so too the soul, purified and illumined, reflects the presence of God. So what this means is that, the mirror in itself actually has nothing. But when we stand in front of it, then we see ourselves, but we also see what the mirror is trying to reflect back to ourselves. So when we stand before the mirror of the cross, we see what we are meant to be, and we also see ourselves in the cross. So it is a two-way thing. It's not a one-way thing, right? And so we see that most writers would have described the soul as a symbol of God, but for Clare, she saw Christ crucified as the true image of God and the image in which we are created. Okay. For those who read the chapter, right, frankly, I thought this chapter was like super chim. It's quite difficult to understand, and there's a lot going on, but I tried to distill it to these main points. So we'll talk about the image of God, and then we'll talk about Christ as the true image of God, and we'll talk about the cross as a mirror. Then we'll look at what does it mean to gaze at the cross, and how then does that reveal the truth about ourselves. So let's begin with the image of God. So we know that we are created in the image and likeness of God, right? But actually, do we know what that means? Yeah. I don't. It took a while, but I think Ilia Delio, through the writings of Clare, actually, she brought forth she kind of explained what the image of God is. Firstly, by telling us what the image of God is not, right? It's not being God by having control and domination over other people or the earth itself. It is not a matter of wielding power and authority, and it's not manipulating others to our advantage. So when we think of God as a power figure, like a figure of authority, and we think, oh, I'm created in the image and likeness of God, doesn't mean that, therefore, I will lord it over others, I have authority. It's not like that. But really, what Ilia tells us is that the image of God is relational. And what does that mean? It means to love, to suffer with another, and to lay down one's life for a friend. Does that sound familiar? It's actually the cross, yeah. And we also see that God is relational, and that we know that from the story of Genesis. Because in Genesis it says, "So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them." In the book, she writes that, why didn't he just create all men or all women? But no, he created them male and female because that is where relationships arise, and relationship is what defines the human person in his or her divine dignity. So we are fraternity, and we have relationship, and so together, if we live out our fraternity, we should be an image of God. Isn't that quite amazing? Yeah. And it's actually the call of the Franciscans, right, to live a life of fraternity. Yeah. Woo. Okay. So now we talk about Christ as the true image of God. So when we think about how, as men, we are created in the image of likeness of God, actually that can be a little bit disillusioning, especially if we, consider what's going on in the world, right? The Russia-Ukraine war, we have all these natural disasters. We have in the newspaper, we have like all sorts of horrifying crimes committed by family members against each other. And when we see all of that, and then we think man is supposed to be created in the image of God, what does that really look like? Doesn't it make us feel a bit disillusioned, right? But Bonaventure emphasizes on the word of God as the true image. And the word of God is Christ. And in Bonaventure's commentary on the sentences, sorry, fun fact, I thought the sentences was the title, but actually it's commentary on the sentences. Yeah, that's okay, never mind. Geeky moment. In the book, only sentences is italicized, but actually the full title, commentary on the sentences, which I don't really know what it means, but never mind. So, so, alright, yeah. So it distinguishes. So in Bonaventure, he distinguishes between the Son of God as image and the human person as image. So just because you're flawed, it doesn't mean that that's it. But actually, when we think about what is the image of God, we must look to the Son of God, because the Son is from the Father. The Son is the perfect image and expression of the Father, sharing the same nature and thus expressing the Father totally and completely. So, in as much as the human is oriented towards God, he or she is only tending towards the image, whereas the Son of God is the image of the Father. So you see this chart right here, or if you remember your math. Okay, so the asymptote, the curve right tends towards infinity, but it will never be infinity because it's only tending towards it. But then the Son of God is infinity, so he's like there, yeah. So up there. Infinity. Yeah. Very deep. Yeah. Because I watched, okay, never mind. I shall not divert. No, I was watching this Korean drama on math. Yeah, I'm very inspired.
They need to be poor, you need to end on zero.
Yeah.
Self-empty.
Yes. And actually across. Oh, yeah. Okay, so the human person is an image of God, not in the general sense, but actually in the specific sense of being like the Son. So I'll repeat that again. The human person is an image of God, not in the general sense of being like God, but specifically in being like the Son. So that means that Jesus Christ, as the incarnate Word of God, shows us what it means to be an image of God in our humanity. So the human person is created as an image of the image of God, and that image is Jesus Christ. Okay. And it's frowning. We are
image squared.
Image squared. Continuing the math reference. Yes. And we are an image of Jesus because the true image of God is Jesus Christ. And that underscores the relationship between humanity and the Word made flesh. So Bonaventure, he considers that the incarnation is the starting point for understanding the deepest truth about the human person and his or her relationship to the divine. Because it is in the incarnation that God became man, he became the true image, so that he could be the model for all of us to follow, so that we can walk towards becoming the image of God as we were created to be. So we are Word people in that we are all called to incarnate the Word in our own time, in our own place. So let's talk about the mirror of the cross. Now, Clare actually saw the image of God visibly expressed in the crucified Christ. So this is the San Damiano cross for all those who are seeing it for the first time. The crucified Christ is the mirror because when we gaze on the cross, we see a true reflection of ourselves, our own image, right? So just now we're talking about how we are created in the image of God. Christ is the image of God, and we are meant to be like Christ. And so when we look on this mirror, we see a true reflection of ourselves. And just now we were talking about how the mirror doesn't exist on its own. It doesn't provide an image on its own. It needs to reflect something. And so when we stand in front of the cross and when we gaze on it, we look at it, we see what we are meant to be, and then it reflects back on, are we like that, right? It's both aspirational and also reflective of who we are meant to be. Yeah. So Christ reflects what we are meant to be in our lives. But the mirrors that we see in our world, the mirror is actually it's an everyday tool, right? I don't think anybody would go a day without looking in the mirror. I'm sure, you get out of bed, you brush your teeth, you look in the mirror. You put your makeup, you look in the mirror. Do your hair, for most of us, maybe except father. Kitty. Anyway, we all look in the mirror, right? And it's an everyday tool that reflects only our exterior image. It tells us what we look like, but it doesn't tell us what we are inside. So it doesn't give us the full image of who we are. It is an incomplete picture. And in the world that we live in, so caught up with external appearances. For example, if you're into K-pop, Korean beauty standards are crazy. Like all these societies, even in our own, like we have certain beauty standards to aspire to. But we are reminded that actually this is all incomplete because as we see in the first reading of in the first book of Samuel, when the prophet Samuel was trying to pick out the king, or trying to anoint the king among Jesse's sons, he saw the tall guy, and then he thought, oh, this must be this one. But then God was like, no, God does not see as man sees. Man looks at appearances, but the Lord looks at the heart. But in the end, he picked somebody with fine eyes, good complexion, and a pleasant disposition. So, but anyway, yes. But the point is that, we are very caught up with the external, right? But what if we had a mirror that allowed us to look within ourselves? And that is the mirror of the cross. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. So in Clare's third letter to Agnes of Prague, most of Clare's spirituality is derived from her letters to Agnes. Yeah, so she tells Agnes, place your mind before the mirror of eternity, place your soul in the brilliance of glory, place your heart in the figure of the divine substance, and transform your entire being into the image of the Godhead itself through contemplation. Pause here for a while while we let the word sink in. So Clare asked Agnes of Prague to gaze into the mirror of the crucified Christ so that she can discover who she is inwardly and what she reflects outwardly. So Clare's guidance is that the cross is a mirror that reflects who we are meant to be and how far we fall short of being an image of Christ. And she also tells us how to get there. How do we go from looking at ourselves in the mirror of the cross and feeling so so inadequate, but how do we get to becoming that image? And that is by gazing at the cross. Gazing at the cross. So we see in the book that the writer tells us that love is contemplation. So I put the words just now from Clare's third letter on the left box. So Clare's words actually reminds us of Jesus' command that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And so to love God is to contemplate. And to contemplate then leads to transformation. Right? So when we look at the words from Clare, she invites you to place your mind before the mirror of eternity, place your soul, place your heart in the figure of the divine substance. And it actually links to what we see in Luke chapter 10, when Jesus says, you must love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and all your might. Right? And then true love, when we love, we love by contemplating, and then we transform our entire being into the image of the Godhead itself. And the writer also talks about the cross as the mirror of eternity. Do we think about it that way? Do we see that actually, when we look at the cross, it is a reflection of that Christ is eternity, right? Because he's infinite. And the cross is the mirror of eternity because eternity is hanging on the cross. So it's actually quite profound to really pause and think about it. It's not, and it goes back to what we spoke about at the start, which was that the cross is not a static event, it's a dynamic, it is alive, it is a dynamic everyday event. Yeah. And God is revealed as all-embracing, outpouring love in the figure of the crucified Christ. And so in the cross, we see a reflection of the eternal God, who is the fullness of love. And we also see that gazing is actually a visual experience of embrace. So I wanted to find that photo, the picture that you like to show, the one with Francis clinging onto the cross, but couldn't find it on Google. But anyway, don't have, yeah. So we can settle for this picture, which is also very beautiful. So we see Francis, clinging onto the crucified Christ. He's gazing, and it's like a visual experience of embracing. And Jesus is also stooping to embrace him. And so in Clare's fourth letter to Agnes, she says, inasmuch as this vision is the splendor of eternal glory, the brilliance of eternal light, and the mirror without blemish, look upon that mirror each day, O Queen and Spouse of Jesus Christ, and continually study your face within it, so that you may adorn yourself within and without with beautiful robes, and cover yourselves with the flowers and garments of all the virtues, as becomes the daughter and most chaste bride of the Most High King. So for all the girls in the room, I think this, it's easier for us to relate to because it's about the bride image, right? But honestly, I think for guys, it's a bit hard, right? No? Can I? Father JP has no problems adorning. Yeah. Because you're enlightened, for the layman, like, are you all comfortable with this image? Beautiful robes, flowers, yeah. But I mean, we are all like called to be spouses of Christ. Yeah, spouses of Christ, not just brides, because the church is the bride and Jesus is the bridegroom, and we're all called to be in a like a relationship to the same extent of marriage with Christ. Yeah. And the writer tells us that to gaze is to be drawn into the object which one sees. That's what she means by a visual experience of embrace. So I don't know whether, okay, so when you go for adoration, sometimes you just like, I'll sit there and then stare at the Blessed Sacrament, right? And sometimes it's really like nothing, like it's just, and it's laughing, just like, there's nothing here. But actually sometimes, in moments of contemplation, it really feels like you are with the Blessed Sacrament, like you are in a intense experience of love with Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. I think sometimes we do have the experience, right? And it's similar to what essentially Clare is talking about. And the writer also refers to this quote by Miroslav Volf, which very nicely puts what is meant by this visual experience of embrace. So And what is required to have this embrace, right? It requires this. Open arms are a gesture of the body reaching for the other. They are a sign of discontent with my own self-enclosed identity, a code of desire for the other. It means I do not want to be myself only. I want the other to be part of who I am, and I want to be part of the other. So it requires a reaching out from within to want to recognize that I don't want to be by myself. I want to get out of my self-enclosed identity and to really reach out for the other. And in that reaching out, that is when the embrace happens. And open arms also signify that, I have created space within myself, which is poverty, we'll talk about it later, for the other to come in. And that not only have I made this space for myself, I made a movement out of myself to enter the space created by the other. So like looking at this picture with Francis, right? And you see in the painting, the way that the artist portrays his eyes is almost like a look of desperate love, actually. Like, he has nothing. He has absolutely nothing. And he wants to, all he has is in reaching out for the Lord and embracing the Lord. And the Lord then has made a space for him, in the crook of his arm and leaned down to embrace Francis. So that is really the embrace, that gazing experience that we're talking about today. The gaze on the crucified Christ is an embrace of the heart, a desire to allow the otherness of God's love into our lives. And we saw in Clare's letter that she tells Agnes to look upon the mirror of the cross each day. So it is a daily encounter with a God of humble love that is hidden in fragile humility. And gazing must happen of the heart. It's not just a matter of looking. So just now when I was talking about, just looking at the Blessed Sacrament, it's probably because I was just looking, but actually when you really gaze with the heart, with the soul, with the eyes of the heart, and that's where the heart opens its arms to allow the Spirit of God's love to enter. And how do we create that space within ourselves to, receive that embrace, right? It is in poverty. That poverty creates the space we need in the heart to receive what we see and to embrace what we see. Because if we're so self-absorbed and so self-fulfilled, like I'm fine on my own, I have everything I need, then how can you create that space within yourself to receive, right? It's only when we are free of things that we possess or possess us that we are able to see more clearly and to receive. So I like this analogy of, when people say that, I feel like I've been deprived. I feel like, I want to cling to something. I want to cling to whatever I can control, right? But it is really in the clinging that, we can't receive because we're holding on to something, but in letting go, in poverty and allowing God to then come in and fill that space, that's when, that embrace and the experience happens. But gazing is difficult and needs grace, like true gazing with the heart, especially when you're gazing on the crucified Christ. So do you all know where this picture is from? Passion of Christ, yeah. I only watched it for the first time last year because I couldn't bear to watch it. Yeah. Because it was so, yeah. Yes. And gazing on the crucified Christ as a way of encountering God is difficult because, as humans, we are not attracted to suffering or to crucified bodies. We see the crucifixes in church, they're very clean, they're no blood, no nothing, just maybe on the hands, one blood, yeah. Or even the San Damiano cross so quite nice because it's the resurrected Christ, right? But actually, the reality of the crucifixion is exactly like that. It's bloody, it's gory, it's painful, and it's hard for us to come face to face and to really accept it, right? And we tend to deny suffering, our own suffering, and also the suffering of others. And as a result, we shun the disfigured, we abandon the dying, because we cannot come face to face with it. And we erase their presence by ignoring them or pretending they don't exist. so that we can focus on the pretty things of life and focus on beauty, skincare, wealth, bags, health. Yeah. We, it is natural as humans to really shun and despise suffering, but the cross requires us to embrace it, to embrace the reality of the suffering Christ. Yeah. And when we look at the crucifix, when we look at the cross, we see that God is revealed in fragile, frail, and crucified flesh. And it's in encountering the scandalous figure of the crucified Christ that we come to encounter the power of God's love. Yeah. And to gaze at something so difficult to look at, right, requires openness of grace. It requires openness to grace. It requires the Spirit to open ourselves, to allow ourselves to step away from who we are, naturally are, to really embrace the God who is humble love in the face of this total suffering. And gazing at the cross also restores justice and dignity to the human person. So in the book, the author talks about stories of human cruelty and violence. She relates the story of this Afghan taxi driver who was wrongly accused and then tortured to death eventually. And when he was hanging, I think, from the top of the cell and beaten to the point that when they took him down, his arms were flailing like broken wings of a bird because it was broken, right? And that is the cruelty that is the violence of the human heart that knows no limits in the absence of God. And so when we gaze into the mirror of the cross, it is also a means of restoring justice and dignity to the human person by allowing God's presence to show itself in other people. So don't just talk about like physical torture. I mean, I'm sure all of us wouldn't have done that, but maybe in the way that we talk about other people, like the way we gossip, the way we torture other people by painting lies or falsehoods or, shunning them when it's just convenient to do so. Those are the things that happens when we don't see the presence of God in the other. Yeah. And so when we gaze at the cross and we see what human violence can really be, then it brings to mind that we need to recognize God in others as well. And so to gaze on the cross, it requires the vision of a poor person, the person who knows that she or he is radically dependent on God, so that person can make space within the heart to let God in. And that is what's required for true gazing, for true visual embrace. And finally, the cross also shows the truth about ourselves. What does that mean? So Clare saw the mystery of the human person marked by poverty, humility, and charity in the crucified Christ. And this poverty, humility, and charity are footprints that help us identify the presence of Christ within ourselves. It tells us what we are meant to be, shows us the truth about our humanity. And as mirror and image, when we look on the crucified Christ, we see that his poverty is also our poverty, his humility is our humility, and his capacity to love is also our capacity to love. And that is what it means to reflect the image of God, to reflect the mirror of the cross, to see that what we see in the mirror is actually what is true about ourselves as well. So some questions that are from the book, from the author, just for reflection. When we gaze into the mirror of the cross, what do we see? Do we see our poverty of being? Do we recognize our dependence of God, not only because God is bigger and better, but because we are finite? Do we see God as the power of love to raise to life what might be dead for us? Do we accept ourselves as good and lovable, as the unique created beings God intended in Christ for all eternity? Do we see God's dependence on us to make Christ a visible living presence in the world? I just want to dwell on the second last bullet, because I forgot to mention just now when I was talking about the violence of the human heart. Actually, in the absence of God, sometimes that violence is self-directed. When we're not gentle towards ourselves, when we set overly high expectations, or we don't allow ourselves that space to heal, to really accept ourselves, and that's when we turn against ourselves. But when we look at the cross and we see what we're meant to be and what Christ made us to be, then actually we are good and lovable. And I guess, we need to accept that about ourselves also. And the mirror of Christ also reflects those in others around us. So we might find it difficult to see this image of Christ in ourselves, but we are invited to also see this image of Christ in others, in our neighbors, our parents, our sisters, our brothers, our husbands, our wives, in persons we meet along the way, in our colleagues, people who persecute us. And the image of Christ is that each of us is created to be, is the way God's presence is renewed in the world. So as long as each of us look at the mirror of the cross and try and reflect that image, right, then we become the presence of Christ in the world. And isn't that so powerful? It's really like the kingdom of God here on earth. And to be the image of God is to be in relationship, which I mentioned at the start, right? God is relational. And it's not just any relationship, it is also in relationship with ourselves. And when we look at the cross and we see what we're meant to be, and we see that actually the deeper center of each person, the soul is actually, must be informed by love. So when we come to know ourselves, we come to know God. And then we come to know God, we enter the heart of enduring love. So in Bonaventure's letter to the Clare of Champagne, Longchamp, sorry. Longchamp. Yes, please not bad, yeah. Focus of Longchamp. Sign me up. So he talks about how the first step is self-knowledge. He talks about how the first step is self-knowledge as the way of perfection. So likewise, we need to be in relationship with ourselves. So, yeah. Okay. Yes. So the cross reflects that we all have the immense potential of the human person to be an image of God. And in Clare's third letter to Agnes, she says, "Indeed, it is now clear that the soul of a faithful person, the most worthy of all creatures, because of the grace of God, is greater than heaven itself." But we know that although everybody has the capacity for love, not everyone acts out of love. And she also tells Agnes about it, right? She says, "How many let themselves be deceived, for even though their pride may reach the skies and their heads touch the clouds, in the end they are as forgotten as a dung heap." Actually, Clare quite brutal lah, to say stuff like that, but it's true. So I guess the choice is really with us, right? Do we realize our potential, or do we not fulfill our capacity to love? So, in summary, we started with looking at we started with the chapter. We see that to look into the mirror of the cross is to realize that we are all called to be images of God. And to be images of God, we are called into relationships of love. Relational, right? God is relational. So how do we then come to that place in our lives where we can transcend our self-concerns and self-centeredness? And that is, according to Clare, we must gaze daily on the mirror of the cross. Yeah, so when we see with the heart, when we gaze into the mirror, the figure we see in the mirror is no different from the one who gazes. So we become what we gaze, we become what we contemplate. I think that's what it's supposed to be. So in short, this is more or less the chapter. I want to just spend, let's spend maybe 5 minutes to just gaze on the cross, right? Because we're supposed to do it daily, so we start today. Yeah, maybe this Holy Week, let's commit to spending some time before the cross every day, gazing and having that visual experience of embrace. So you'll see on the slide, I put some quotes. Those are the quotes that I thought were very beautiful, but I had no time to go into. So, you can read it, think about it, or you just gaze on the figure of Christ on the cross, and then we'll just spend 5 minutes here before we continue. So in short, hang on, okay. In short, gaze upon the mirror of the cross each day and be transformed. And we gazing, be honest and truthful. Don't be afraid to gaze on your own image. And when you look into the mirror, what do you see? Yeah. Okay, so before we break out, we'll just spend another maybe until 9 to just consider these questions for reflection. They are the same questions in the book if you have them, and then we will break off into groups for sharing